There we go. Greetings. I am Lady Guðrún Sveinsdóttir, or if you would prefer, Rosie of Mountain Freehold. I am from the Shire of Mountain Freehold in the East Kingdom, and I am our local MOAS. And I believe we have a statement from our East Kingdom MOAS office, if you'd like to take that away.
We do, and also just as a reiteration, we are recording this, so if you do not want to be recorded, please turn off your cameras or microphones, and if you would like to speak or be seen, you may type as an option. That being said, SCA harassment and bullying policy. The SCA prohibits harassment and bullying of all individuals and groups. Participants engaging in this behavior are subject to appropriate sanctions. If you're subjected to harassment, bullying, or retaliation, or if you become aware of anyone being harassed or bullied, contact a National President of the SCA or your kingdom ombudsman. And with that, I would just like to thank Rosie for teaching tonight and hand things back over to her.
Well, thank you. I am going to make this speaker view so that, or maybe I should just pin myself. Pin. There we go. So that if anybody else speaks, it doesn't mess with the recording. All right. So how much has anybody sewn before?
I've done a lot of hand sewing. I don't do it well. My stitches are probably the size of Pennsylvania, but you know.
We'll work on that tonight.
I've done some. I'm working on a sewing project now, but I can use all the help I can get.
Okay. And that's why we're having this class, is a lot of people would love to learn more about hand sewing and machine sewing. Used to be pretty good about 30 years ago. Okay. Yeah.
And the operator liaison who has a Monch in tailoring. So
excellent. All right.
My issue is more vision than I'm a fiber knitter. So, but I have attempted a few outfits and it's very difficult. The smallness of the stitches, but I mean, I would love to become more proficient. Probably should get one of those magnifying lights, so to say. Might
Those
help.
can be really useful. I do highly recommend, if you're having trouble with this size of the stitching, that might be a huge help to you. Let's see. For those who just came in, just to let you know, we are recording. So if you're not okay with that, turn your screens off, please. What is the sewing thing of which you speak? I love it. Viking Garments.
Would love to see your full outfit, by the way. I mean, what I can see, it looks, you're rocking it, but I'd love to see the full outfit.
Well, all right. So my persona is 10th century Birka, Sweden. And I know that the headdress I'm wearing tonight is more Rus, but there's a persona reason for that, Volga trade routes, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a Viking underdress or cirque based off of the Birka pattern. The apron dress is based off of several fragments that have been found that there's been a lot of research done on how they may have looked in a whole dress rather than just the fragments. And I will cover that in the next class that I teach, which will be more basic garb making.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I can talk a little bit about, because this is why we're here, right? We want to be able to make more garb and other projects.
I just thought you were rocking the look and I just wanted to see it.
Well, thank you.
To be honest with you.
My screen won't show the whole thing very easily. Well, maybe if I turn around. Let me bring it up a little bit. And you can
Oh
see.
my. Oh, that is
nice.
awesome. Look at that. Now, how did you tighten it up in the back?
So it's actually, just that the straps here are slightly further to the center, and you can do it even further. But again, I will cover that in the next class. So
Sorry,
that's
I apologize.
Okay. No,
I apologize.
I'm glad you like it. So we will get to all of that, I promise. But for now, I want to get people started with basic sewing techniques to be able to get to this. And I will say, it's also, there's a difference between sewing for yourself and sewing for someone else, and that is with fitting, etc. So that also will be covered in the next class. So let's start with hand sewing and the tools that we need for that. I have brought a bunch of tools to show you. The first things that we're going to want are some type of needle. There are a million different types of needles. And so I brought a few different ones out. There are, so this is just your basic 50 assorted needles that that's just the most basic thing of needles that you can get that will do the best for most projects. And there are some larger ones and smaller ones in the assorted ones. Milliners are going to be longer, and these are for gathering or basting, and we'll get to that when we talk about running stitch. You can use the smaller needles for that, but the larger needles will be a faster sew for that. Then there are a lot more specialized needles. Oh, and I think one pack of those in here. So give me 1 second, please. I haven't even opened this yet because I just hadn't gotten there. But this has different types, curved needles, a yarn needle, etc. These are more specialized. And it also has a seam or a needle gripper. And if you have trouble with how small a needle is and trying to get it through the fabric, a needle gripper can be a good way of putting it through.
Can you show how to use that needle gripper? Because
I will.
My fingers, yeah, yes.
Yes, I will do that. Remind me when we get to actually sewing, and I will show you. So those are the more basic types of needles and some specialized ones. Leather needles, you are not going to want to use that for something like silk because it is triangular at the top. So, you know, let's see if I can make it in focus. So I don't know if you can tell, but it's got a widened bit before the point and it's triangular.
Can you turn the needle a little bit?
I'm sorry?
Can you turn the needle a little bit?
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah. So you can see that it's got different angles on it. So something like that, it's really good for leather and it's also very, very sharp. So beware. But something like that, it's not going to be helpful for just hand sewing a garment. Okay, so we've covered needles. There are different types of pins as well. And my favorites are the pearlized ones, the ones that have bigger heads, because again, they're easier to grip. And we're going to talk about a lot of ergonomic things tonight. So there are those types. There are, these are just the most common types of needle or pins that are just the regular size heads, and they're a lot smaller than the pearlized ones. You can see the difference here. And then there's things like, oh, here we go, like silk pins that they have a tiny little metal flat bit as the head. And I don't know if we can.
No, you're doing excellent, by the
Okay.
way.
Oh, good. So I've learned from watching other classes. So those are good for silk because they don't have a heavy head to weigh it down. But it's less ergonomic than the pearlized pins, so you're not going to be able to grip as easily for heavier fabric. So
Less
Interesting.
likely to make holes in the silk that you can see afterwards.
exactly, they are also thinner, so yes, they are less likely to make holes in the silk. So yes, that is an excellent point for using them in silk. Then there is the seam ripper. This is
Everybody's friend.
the one tool that you never want to have to use, and you're going to use it a lot more than you ever thought you would want to. I once spent 5 hours seam ripping one seam on a garment that was very delicate fabric
Oh,
because
bless
I sewed
you.
it inside out.
Bless you. Oh, dear.
I had no choice. It's so I highly recommend getting one with the ergonomic grip. There's this type, there's also one with more of a bulge. I like it much better than the tiny little seam ripper that fits in, you know, your regular sewing kits. But again, it's bigger, so it's harder to carry with if you've got a small space.
So do you suffer, by the way, with joint pain and whatnot? So
I have tendonitis, so that's why I try to get as many ergonomic tools as possible.
awesome.
So I don't have arthritis yet, but it does run in my family. So that's probably coming pretty soon. But yeah, this is helpful for tendonitis as well as arthritis and other types of hand issues that can happen.
Thank you for having a class that's orientated towards that. Thank you.
Oh, you are more than welcome. I know it helped me to figure out all of this stuff. So my hope is that it'll help other people too. So, all right. So we are on to, let's see, we've covered needles, pins, seam ripper, scissors. I love Fiskars. These are my favorite. So there are many types of scissors. They are not all created equal. Fiskars I have found is very good quality, and there are many types. And you can usually get coupons for Joann's to get like 50% off, which is great, because they're not cheap, but they're good quality. So there are different sizes and different ergonomic grips. These are one of the bigger types they have, but they also have featherweights, which are a lot lighter. They also have ones that I don't have any with me right now, but they are flat at the bottom and the handles are bent upwards so that it.
My screen.
Oh, there you go, like that.
I have
Ooh.
these.
Right, let me pin you.
Spring loaded. So
Ooh, those are nifty.
and you can
Yeah.
cut flat.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for showing those. That was perfect. All right, oops. I don't want to rename myself. I want to pin myself. There we go. All right. And then there are pinking shears, which you can see that they have zigzags. This is good for if you are trying to, if you're trying to just cut an edge that is going to go inside a seam and you aren't planning on finishing a seam, as in rolling it under, doing a rolled seam or a felled seam, something like that, then this is one way to prevent it from fraying. What it does.
Sorry, I didn't.
Pinky
Sorry.
shears are also really good for wool and keeping it from fraying.
Yes.
Um,
Keeping things from fraying are basically why they exist.
and I must say that they do make a left-handing picking shears. They are just terribly expensive. Thank you.
Unfortunately, that is the case. So those are some different types. There's also rotary cutters. And rotary cutters, they are good for some things and not so good for others. One thing is you want to be fairly steady-handed to use these, because if you slip, you can really mess up your fabric. You can just, you know, cut right into where you don't want to cut. But they are also really useful if you are trying to cut a lot of fabric at once and need the ergonomic grip, which this one does have. Again,
What is the manufacturer of that one?
this is
Sorry.
also Fiskars, but there are several manufacturers. And one of the things I like about this one is that it has a cover for the blade that you just you poke the little button and you slide, so that you can protect the blade and anything it comes in contact with when you're not using it. And you can replace the blade fairly easily. It's just on a screw through the middle. It's basically a pizza cutter for fabric. So, yeah. Oh, rotary cutters have taken the skin off your fingers when they were over the edge of a metal ruler. Yeah, they are very, very sharp. They're a razor blade, basically. So you want to be careful with these. And the other thing is with these, you are going to want a plastic cutting mat,
Okay, yeah.
one of the self-healing ones, because that's how to not damage whatever cutting surface you normally use, and it's also better for the blade, and it's more accurate.
The rotary cutter is absolutely awesome, and I would never tell someone not to use a rotary cutter because it is so very good.
Mhm.
But use a metal straight edge, not wood or plastic, and as
Yep.
you say, the self-healing cutting mat is the bomb. It's the best.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
I
I will say myself, I mean, I do a lot of quilting. So I actually have a rotary cutter, and I actually do use plastic, but that's because also it's really great because like this one, it's clear. So you can actually see seam allowance. And when you're cutting and stuff, you can actually put this up at the edge of a pattern and actually cut out that way. And even though like with curves, you can still move your ruler depending, I mean, once you start getting more experienced with it, you can move it around the pattern and actually get a pretty smooth cut. Just saying for the plastic ones. I wouldn't use a thin plastic ruler though, or even the metal ones, because the metal ones mess up my blades, and that plastic one is actually thick. So it's designed for the blade to go up against it. So, but yeah, they can be dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. If you're going to be using, well, any type of ruler, you're going to want it to be thick. And
I would also like to say that I have one, but it's just not that good when you're left-handed. They are made really for right-handed people.
That is true, unfortunately. I mean, you can use it in the left hand, but it's a lot harder. You're right. And I don't think I've seen any ones that were designed for left-handed people, which is but
there are actually a pair out there.
There are? Excellent.
There are. If I can look them up, I'll see if I can find it right now on the side.
Yes,
and see
please.
If
yeah, if you want to put that in the chat, if you can find it, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll see if I can do that now.
Thank you. Great. So those are all different cutting implements. If you want to be really accurate, historically speaking, you can use a knife as long as it's sharp enough, or you can use a pair of more period accurate scissors, which some I find work better than others. But there are reasons that the design has changed over the time. So ergonomics and ease of use, I do recommend the more modern stuff if you have any trouble with that. Okay. Another thing that I find really useful is tailor's chalk, and you can get either the pencils or the, well, they're kind of like pucks. And so that you can use that to mark a line on fabric and it should wash out. It's not always perfect, but if you can't pin into a fabric easily to mark a line, the tailor's chalk works pretty well with that. And again, it's not going to be, it's not going to be perfect, but it's definitely one, it's definitely one tool that I found useful in the past.
I've also found that washable crayon is also very good.
Okay, I've never used that.
Also because it comes in multiple colors for multiple fabric colors, because I can't really see white and blue.
Well, that would help then, yes, definitely. Yeah, cool. Yeah, the white and the blue, it really depends on the fabric. If it's white on black fabric, that's one thing, but if it's, you know, a more in between color, it's sometimes hard to see. Yeah. Yeah, you have a pair of period shears, Nia, and they are not really suitable for anything heavier than linen, and they always leave a very messy edge. Yeah,
they're quite blunt,
yep,
to say the least. And they're, like you say, they're not ergonomic at all. They really do ache your hands very quickly. So,
yep,
yeah,
that's unfortunate, but yeah, it depends how accurate you want to be.
They're pretty though.
I bet they are. I love the look of them. I love the look of period stuff.
They're nice on the garb, but yeah, not for modern sewing.
Exactly.
Embroidery thread.
Yeah. Another tool that I love is a drawstring threader, because while you can use a safety pin and tie it to the drawstring and pull it through, it takes a lot longer. Whereas this has 2 different size loops so that you can put whatever, wherever the thread or drawstring can fit, you put it through, and then you just pull it through the whole thing, and you actually get a much easier time doing that.
Do they sell those at Joann's?
I'm sorry?
Do they sell those at Joann's?
Yes, they do. That's where I got mine. The only problem I've found with these is that cats really love attacking them because they think they're a toy. So I would not recommend leaving them out where a cat can get them. Yeah, I speak from experience.
So that is officially called a drawstring threader.
Drawstring threader.
Oh,
yes.
I've not heard of that before. Can you show that again?
Yes. Drawstring
threader.
They are so useful. They're not cat toys? Well, I mean, they can be, but Nia, you're right. Joann's is an American shop. I don't know what the equivalent is in the UK, I'm sorry, but it's basically a huge chain craft store that focuses on fabric types of crafts and yarn types of crafts for the most part. They do have other types as well, but they are like the biggest fabric store in America. So, Bodkin? Oh, okay, very cool. Good to know. Another thing, measuring tools, measuring tapes. Not all measuring tapes are exactly the correct measurements. They are not always scientifically exactly an inch or centimeter, whatever you're working with. So what you're going to want to do with your measuring tape is use the same measuring tape from start to finish on a project, so that you can be sure they're at least accurate to that project. Yeah, you had one job measuring tape. Yeah, I know, right? But
things like plastic cloth stretch over time.
Yes, so it does stretch over time. And another excellent reason to use the same one from start to finish. If you want to be more period accurate, you can use a string with thread or with knots in it at even intervals and just go by the knots. However, you know, it's kind of easier to measure increments in modern ones. There's also flexible.
Is cloth less likely to stretch?
It depends what type of cloth it is. Some cloths are more likely to stretch than others. But I mean, any fibers can also stretch at least a little bit over time if it frays or whatever. So just, you know, something to think about. There's also flexible ones, which I find this useful if I'm trying to measure a specific shape and then need to transfer that measurement to something else to cut it out. Because, you know, you can bend it and it stays in shape. So that can be very useful. There's also yardsticks.
Where did you find the flexible one?
Joann's.
Okay.
I have found most of my tools there. I may have gotten a few gift certificates over the years because my family knows me well. So yeah, that's another good tool. One thing I really love is my seam gauge, which you can find these pretty much everywhere. And this little bit flexes up and down so that you can choose the width of your seam or, you know, whatever you're cutting so that it can be exactly the same as you go along from the edge to wherever you're cutting. Oh, curve measuring device. Yes. The French curve, where did I put mine? I'm not sure where I put my French curve. I use it so often. French curves are very useful for certain projects. I do a lot of Viking era, so I don't do a lot of curves. But yes, if you're doing curves, later period garb or whatever, French curve is definitely something to look up. There is a hip curve, which is a type of French curve that can be very helpful as well. Let's see. Oh my goodness, it's already 7:30. All right, so let's finish up tools very quickly. I will show you a couple of period tools, which I just got for my birthday. And so this comes from Fairy Tales Chest, which is Svetlana, and I can't remember what kingdom she's in, but she has made this wonderful little sewing kit. It is leather on the outside, fashioned after a Birka wallet, wool on the inside so that you can put your period needles and pins, nail binding needle and thread winders, etc. So there is a reason that we switched from copper and brass to steel. Yes, she does have really cool stuff, and I am so excited about this. I can't wait to actually use it. But I will say, because the metals are softer, I don't know if I can make this show up very easily, but I don't know if you can see the end is just slightly bent. Yes, I do have a link. Let me put that in the chat very quickly before I forget. Oops.
I have my French curve if you wanted to see it.
Oh yes, please. There we go. And let me find you in here so that I can pin you again. There's a few people to scroll through to get to you. There you are. Let me pin you. All right, so that is a French curve. Thank you, that's great. I'm glad that we can have that example. So you can see how it curves around at kind of a certain angle and then the angle changes.
Could she show it again? Could
Yes.
she show it again?
Thank you, yes. Yeah, it's a very, very useful tool for different types.
Trying to get the
curves.
glare out too from the light.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that can be a challenge. Oh, I see my face in it. That's funny.
Ah, yeah, there you go.
All right. Thank you. That is awesome. Okay, so let me go back to me. There we go. Yes, thank you. Perfect. So yeah, so I'm very excited to work with this. But I mean, it does also show the reasons why we switched to steel. It's a lot easier. We don't have to bend, unbend things. Yeah, the needle will also bend with your grip over time. Yeah, yeah, that could be a feature. It could have definitely been helpful for people to have a needle that was, it's like, wearing in a pair of shoes, right? Okay, so let's get to some talking about fabric choices. So fabric, you can use many different types of fabric, of course. If you want to go period correct, you're going to want to go with more natural fibers, of course. Wool, linen, silk. Wool and linen are the most common for most areas. Silk is more expensive, and for most of the places that we portray, silk had to be imported and therefore was not widely available. So yeah, that is a lot less common than linen and wool. Wool is the most common. Cotton also, if you are somewhere in the Middle East or India, those more tropical areas were more likely to have cotton. Well, I mean, they're not really tropical, but more southern areas. The northern areas, wool was the easiest to procure. And then linen, but linen takes a lot of work. I don't know if anybody's watched the process of making linen out of flax, but it's a big process. Okay, so I'm going to show you, this is a piece of linen. Oh, maybe. Aha, here we go, it's showing up. So you can see that there is a very definite pattern. You can see the threads going from left to right and up to down, usually. So it is much easier to sew on linen because of that than it is to sew on something like a felted wool or a silk. Yeah, linen takes a community, you're right. Oh, basting. Yes, we'll get to basting. Copper needle hardened. I'm not sure. That's a question I would have to ask her. Okay, this is cotton. So you can see it's a much tighter weave, and you can still see the pattern of the warp and weft threads, the left to right and up and down, but it's much finer. So it's easier to see on the linen than it is on the cotton. Okay. Let's see if I have some wool around. Well, I've got a I'm working on right now, so I'm trying to recreate the Kostrup apron dress. So I've got a lot of pleating that I need to do. But so this is wool fabric that is slightly felt already, and you can see it's much thicker and much harder to
hear
tell.
you just a moment ago.
Oh, you couldn't. Sorry.
I don't know if it was because you had something in front of a microphone or what, but I just
that could very well be. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right, so this is much harder to see the warp in the weft because it's thicker. There are some very fine tropical wools that you can still see it more easily, but the thicker ones not as easily. In silk, it depends on the top. Oh, sorry, Deborah, but we will see you at some point. I will give you the recording later. Yes, so silk, I don't have a good example in front of me, but there are many different types of silk. Samite would be the most accurate. Yeah, there are also tissue silks, and do I have one of those? Well, I have a, here we go. I have a silk veil that is fairly thin. So you can you still hear me even though it's in front?
Yeah.
Hopefully. Okay, good. So this, it's a little harder to see the warp and weft because it's such a fine thread. And a lot of silks are going to be like that. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's get to some actual sewing. Oh, in the handout, which I haven't gotten to yet, but I promise I will get that to you as soon as I possibly can, hopefully by the end of this week. I talk about washability of fabric. There are fabrics that are more easily washed than others, and you're definitely going to want to check on your fabric. Even if you're using modern fabrics, you definitely want to check because of dye bleed and shrinkage. So those are definitely things to check on before sewing with any fabric. All right, so hand sewing. I am going to, let's see. I'm going to use this one, which is already threaded with a contrasting color. Threading the needles. Let me actually unthread that. So to thread a needle, you're going to want to somehow wet the end and pinch it to make sure all of the fibers are together and nothing is straying. And then whatever size the eye of your needle is, hopefully that will correspond to the size of the thread so it's easy to put on. One thing that I really like to do is, here, let me see if I hold it in front of my face, maybe no, it still doesn't go into focus. One thing that's important is to bring the needle to the thread rather than the other way around. And I can't do that far enough away from my face. So you want to put the needle around the thread rather than the thread through the needle, and just push to where you can catch the thread and then pull it through. There are two different styles for this, for securing the ends. If you want to have the thread doubled, then you make a knot in the end and then you sew that way. If you don't want to have the thread doubled, then you just keep the tail, the end that's not really the working end, long, but not quite as long as the end that you are going to use to start sewing. So you can either make a knot in this end, the end that you're going to use to secure. Yes, you can use a needle threader. Oh, that's one thing that I didn't show. Do I have that around? No, darn. I have needle threaders. I just didn't bring one over. But if you have trouble threading a needle, needle threaders are really useful for that. It's a little metal device. You put the little metal end through the eye of the needle, put the thread through that, and then pull the needle threader back through with the thread so that it's much easier to do. And if you have trouble with eyesight, that is definitely the way to go, because it's so hard to see the eye of the needle otherwise. much easier when you're using a needle threader. So folding the end, then threading. Yes, that is definitely another possibility. Okay, so you can make a knot in the end. That is definitely one way to do it. I'm going to show you another way though. So if you take a tiny stitch, let me see if I can come over to the computer. If you take a tiny stitch through your fabric, and so that's back and forward again, and you pull it through, and you pull it, will go through all the way, but not quite. So there's a little tail. I'm going to make that come into focus.
You've lost your mic.
I'm over my mic again. Ah, shoot. Okay, thank you. Okay, so you want to make this. Let's see if I can bring this up. Can you still hear me now? I'm over the microphone, aren't I? Okay. All right.
Can you bring your face closer to the work? It's okay if you bring your face closer.
Okay.
Unless you
Is
have a
that
hard
better?
time seeing like we do.
Well, sometimes. That's why I wear glasses. No. All right. All right. So can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
All right. Can you see what I'm doing? Because that's okay. So there's this little tail. You're going to want to keep that there and go through the same holes again. In and out. And pull it through, making sure that you don't pull that tail through.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to do this 3 more times or 4 more times. I like to do the rule of 5 stitches. So this is already 2 stitches. So let me do 1, 2. If I end up staying later, because I know we've only got 15 minutes left, would anybody still want to stay, or do you all have to leave?
I'm good. I'll stay.
Okay. All right. Because I want to make sure to cover at least some of it. I know we're not going to get to everything tonight, but I want to get to as much as possible. All right. So now it is very secure. You can tell that it doesn't go anywhere. So now you can start sewing. The first stitch I'm going to teach you is running stitch, and some of you may have already done this. So running stitch is pretty much the most simple stitch. It's just in and out in a line. So you put the needle in to the back and out to the front. And one thing you could do is you could just put it to the back and pull it completely through, and then put it to the front and put it completely through. But that takes a lot longer. So if you just go in and out, so you're just taking a little dip into the fabric and then coming straight back out, it's a lot easier. And you can actually do this several times in a row so that you're not doing this every stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So do you see how my needle is going through several times before I then pull it through? Stab stitch is going in and out fully. Yeah. Thicker materials, sometimes you definitely need to do that with thicker materials. Another thing that it's useful for is embroidery. And this is basting if it is big stitches that are meant to be pulled out later, but it's called running stitch if you're taking small stitches that are supposed to stay in. And one thing that I like to do is every few stitches, I then take what's called a back stitch. And so what I do, I go back around the stitch that I just did.
You lost your mic.
Okay. I don't know if you can see this, but I am going back through a stitch that I just did. And then I continue forward. So can you see that? Yeah. And if you do that every few stitches, it stops it from gathering or bunching. And so the thing with running stitch is you can use it to gather things. So you can make little pleats with it, or just a gathered bit of fabric. But when you don't want it to gather, you don't want it to pull the fabric too far on its own, that's when you do a back stitch every few to stop it from doing that. All right, so, and if you want to continue doing back stitch every single time, you can. It uses a lot more thread, but it is very sturdy, and it's good for mending and things like that. I like it for that. So there's more types. Whip stitch. Whip stitch, I'm going to actually fold the fabric over and start it. So whip stitch is a good one for putting edges together, or for well, either making a decorative edge stitch or to mend things that got a hole in the middle of them. So whip stitch is around and around the fabric. So let me show you. So you see how now it's 2 layers of fabric, and you are going over and around. And so it creates this stitch over the top. So whip stitch is also called overlock stitch. And let's see here. If I do a couple more stitches of this, then I can show you another thing that you can do with it, which is a decorative overlap. So you can see how right now there are several stitches in a row. And if I want to make this more decorative, I can go back to create X's. So I go back through the previous stitch and around. And let me do one more so that it'll be a little easier to see. Okay, so you can see how it makes a little X at the top if you're doing, how do you stop a whip stitch from bunching? You do it carefully, or you do a running stitch or a back stitch first, and then you do a whip stitch over top of it to prevent bunching on the front of a fabric if you're using it to finish a seam. Using it on a leather quiver, yeah, it's very useful for leather and finishing stitches. Okay, so those are a couple of different ones here. There's also one thing that is semi-like whip stitch is buttonhole stitch or blanket stitch. So there are similarities. It's here, let me get to where I can show you. Take a couple more running stitches to get to the next point. All right. So instead of just going around and around and around, you're going to go around and then catch the loop of thread behind the needle. And it's easier if you start, if you have two to start with. Oh, I'm catching my tail in the needle. When that happens, just make the tail shorter. And let me get to where I can show you this. All right. So here we go. So what I've done is I've made a couple vertical stitches and then put it through, and then I pull it around, but I make sure that it goes through that loop again. And then I go around, but I pull through that loop. Oh, if my thread will cooperate with me. This is easier when, oh, here we go. This is easier when somebody is using a much bigger thread. It's done usually with embroidery floss or something like that. But if you're using it to do a buttonhole, it's, you know, you take tinier stitches and you, there's a slight difference between buttonhole and blanket stitch. One is back to front, one is front to back. How do you choose thread? It depends on what the project is that you're working on, and what the size of the fabric is. Like if it's a very thick fabric versus a very delicate fabric, and also materials. So with silk, it's nice to use silk thread. Polyester is, of course, the easiest to find, and it is fairly strong. That is one thing I forgot to talk about, is choosing thread. I love Guðrún. You want a good quality thread because it breaks fewer times than a lower quality thread. I would choose Guðrún over Coats and Clark any day, honestly. So finding a good quality thread, even if it's still polyester, you know, it will do the trick. If you want to do linen, you just have to make sure that it is the right size of thread. I actually had this problem, is I ordered linen from thread from a German company, and I thought that it was something that I could use in my machine, and it was hand sewing only, and it was larger, and I could not use it in the machine for the project that I needed to finish. It was so frustrating. But I will be using it hand sewing at some point. Yes, good quality thread also produces less lint in a sewing machine and can help prolong the life of your machine. Yes, that is so important. And machines do require maintenance once in a while. It's helpful. You can find manuals online, and that can help troubleshoot things or help you learn how to use it. There's also a lot of tutorials on YouTube. So if you're stuck on your particular type of machine, look up, you know, whatever the name is, the brand and the type of machine, and you should be able to find something online, theoretically. Same goes with Sergers if you've got a Serger. That's how I got mine working after I accidentally snapped the thread, which was a huge pain, but there are tools for that too, and that's very different. Okay, so we've talked about buttonhole and blanket stitch. I am going to look at my notes very quickly, because here we go, because I had them in the handout. And I just want to make sure I'm covering everything. For those who came late, we are going to go over time tonight. Let's see. Oh, I didn't talk about pattern paper. If you're making your own patterns, wrapping paper is a really easy choice to use for that. It's easy to find, it's durable, and it's cheap. So that is definitely a good choice. I didn't talk about irons and ironing boards. It's so helpful to have an iron and ironing board because if you are ironing things before you sew, it really helps with accuracy in measuring and cutting. And then ironing after the sewing helps to set the seams and make sure the fit is correct. So if you want to go historical, even the Viking era peoples had linen smoothers. There's a company called Historical Glassworks that carries reproductions of glass linen smoothers. And then the Practical Viking, I know, is one company that carries handmade smoothing boards, the wooden smoothing boards. And I can write those names. I don't have their websites on me right now, but I can write the names in the chat. Let me do that. Flatbed sheets work for patterns. They do. However, you have to account for drape. And when you're talking about drape, oh, you've got a linen smoother. Okay, just one second. I want to talk about drape first. When you're talking about the drape of fabric, you want to make sure that if you're using a bed sheet to fit something, that you're not counting on it to have the same drape that the fabric you'll be using for the final project will have. Because if you are doing something in a heavy wool and you're using a flat bed sheet for a pattern, it's not going to drape the same way at all. You could transfer your pattern to a clear shower liner. That's another way to do it. Yeah, there are many options. I do really enjoy wrapping. So I have found that it works really well. Oh yes, thank you. You've got the Historical Glassworks thing there. Okay.
So this is actually a linen slicker that Historical Glassworks made.
Excellent. Let me pin your if I can find you again. There we go. There you are. Okay, thank you.
So this is something called a linen slicker. It is a very period item. It is best for linen because linen tends to crease, especially if you apply heat like with your hands. And it just takes seams and folds very well. If you smooth this across it, it also helps to align the fibers to give it a better sheen.
Yes.
It typically has a divot on one side, which is easier to hold. And this is about the shape, size, and color they would be.
Yes, thank you. I actually just ordered one. I'm really excited to get it. Pattern material from Joann's. Yes. Okay, let me replace that. Yeah, there's pattern material from Joann's that you can get, or other fabric shops. Let's see, Practical Viking. Let me write that down. I know they have one smoothing board in stock right now, but they do make them. So if they run out, you know, they could probably make one for you. Okay, I think, was that it with tools? Because I want to make sure. Oh, fray check. It's glue, but if you're using a serger, it's really useful to secure the thread ends so that they don't fray if they aren't finished in a seam. But you probably don't need that for basic sewing techniques. It's just for more advanced ones. Oh, there we go. Oops. Paper, the shop name from earlier. Yes, Practical Viking, and then the Historical Glassworks, the link is in the chat. Paper rolls med offices make for good pattern paper. Yeah, that makes sense. I wouldn't have thought of that, but yeah, like chiropractic offices, etc. the rolls to go on the tables. Yeah, that's good. Drop cloth paper at any home. Yep. Oh yes, and the fairy tales chest. Great. So back to sewing. Let me see if I've gotten through all of the hand sewing techniques that I wanted to show you. All right, we went over running stitch, back stitch, whip stitch, blanket, and buttonhole. Oh, we haven't done herringbone. Okay, let's do herringbone quickly. The needle kit Prezi, yeah, that's the fairy tales chest that was just reposted. Yes. Okay, so let me get here. So the herringbone stitch is also called a catch stitch, and it can be used for decorative purposes, but it can also be used for hems. Either way, it's very useful. So I'm gonna actually fold this over so you can see how I do it as a hem finishing edge. So what you're going to want to do after you secure your thread is to make a quick stitch, and it's just a little tiny stitch, and then pull it through, and then you're going to go back, or oh, somebody else is trying to get in. There we go. And then you're going to go.
You're off camera.
Oh, I'm off camera again.
Yeah.
There you go. Thanks. All right, so you've got, I'm actually, do I want to go it that way? Yeah, I'll go this way. So you're going to want.
You're still off camera.
I'm still off camera. Sorry. I'm trying to see here. Crud, I need to get my eyes checked. All right. So you take a tiny little stitch, then you take, I think I'm going backwards here, so I might turn it around to make it easier to show. Yeah, I'm gonna work from this direction. Okay, so little tiny stitch. Then you're going to cross over and make a little tiny stitch diagonally down. And it's going backwards because I'm working from left to right. So then you take another little stitch diagonally up. So you're making 2 rows of stitches, but they are offset diagonally. Does that make sense how I'm saying it? They're making little X's. Okay, so I made another little stitch and then cross it over, make another stitch. Oops. And I know that these are not even at all because it's hard to work in the direction I'm working right now. It's a very weird angle. But you can see how they are little X's. So that is really good for securing a hem or for a decorative stitch if you're doing it more evenly than I just did it. So I think we've run out of room on this end. So I'm going to finish off the thread. How do you keep them in line? There are different ways to do it. Either if you have a fabric where it's really easy to see the grain of the fabric, then you just make sure you're in the same grain as the last stitch. If you're not, you could measure it. You could use fabric chalk to make little dashes where you want to take your stitches. Or if you are more experienced at measurements by eye, you can just do it by what you see, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. So it really depends on what works for you. Okay, so here, marker on your thumb for even spaces. Yeah, you can make little marks on your thumbnail, and that can be, you know, where you want to space your stitch. That is a useful technique. However, if then you have to go into work with little marks on your thumb and people are like, what? Then, you know, it depends. It depends on what people allow. All right, so I'm going to finish off the same way I started, and then I'm going to show you another way of finishing the thread off. So I am going to take 5 little stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And once I take those 5 stitches, I am going to, I mean, it is secure, but if you over-engineer things like I do, I also make a knot. So I will put the thread or the needle through that loop of thread that I have created with 5 stitches. And then I am going to bring it through the little loop that is made that way. I'm not going to pull it all the way through yet. So I'm going to pull it through. Oh, and the thread came out. And that makes a knot, and you pull it tight. And you can do this 2 or 3 times if you really want to make it really, really secure, which it probably doesn't need, but you know, I'm paranoid about things coming apart, so I overdo it. Knots are period. No knots are out of period. Yeah, I really like knots. I really like doing the 5 stitches as well, but the knots are very period. So you can also, instead of doing what I just did, you can also just take a stitch and do a knot the same way we just made a knot, except it's through 1 stitch and a little bit of fabric. And then you do another knot the same way, taking that through the loop. And that is another way to finish it off. Victorian snobbery. You know, they did a few things right, but they over-engineered things like I do, so I kind of appreciate that. So those are some of the more common stitches that are also period. There's also sewing buttons on, but I didn't prepare a button, and I know we're running out of time. So, one thing I did was in the handout, I put links to different tutorials people have done on YouTube for each one of these stitches, because I also figured that it would be easier to see than what I can do with my little screen here. Other people have much better, more professional setups. So any questions before we go on to, oh, I didn't show you the I'm sorry, the thread or the needle gripper. Let me get to that before we move on. Here we go. So it's just a little rubber grippy thing. So you take it with your needle, and once you've threaded your needle, and you just use it to grip the needle. And of course you have to reset it every time the needle goes through the fabric, but it does help to hold on. And because it's the type of rubber that has little roughness to it, it's hard to see on here, but it's got a little roughness to it, so it makes it really good and grippy. hopefully that helped with that. Yes, I will share the handout to the Facebook event as soon as possible. It is not quite finished yet because this class came together very quickly, but I will definitely do that as soon as possible. Oh, thimbles! I didn't talk about thimbles. There are many types of thimbles. There's leather ones, plastic ones, metal ones, tailor's thimbles, which are metal, but it has no top to it. There's a sailor's palm, which is slightly later, but it was used for making sails. And it sits on the palm of your hand so that you can push through the canvas. It's really good for heavy duty stuff, like making sails or leather work, etc. Yes, thank you for reminding me about that. Can't believe I forgot to tell you about thimbles. Okay. All right, any questions before we move on to machines? No? All right. Excellent. Then let me bring my fabric over to the machine, and I think I'm going to use a different scrap because this one has pretty much been used up. So let me cut a new one. This is why I keep scrap fabric. Did you know that pieces of scrap fabric are called cabbage? I learned from Bernadette Banner. I don't know if anybody follows her on YouTube, but she's awesome. But she talks about cabbage all the time, and this is what she means is bits of scrap fabric. Okay, let me get that. All right, so we are going back over to the sewing machine where we will attempt to show you how to do this. I think I have pins over there as well. So I apologize for the very messy sewing room. This is because I have a million projects going on all the time, but especially right now. Holidays coming up, etc. All right. Does that, that washes it out. All right, it might actually be easier to see without the lights. Okay, so let's go.
No voice.
Okay, let me bring myself around. Is that easier? I have to hold the camera this way, but can you hear me better?
I think you have a directional microphone, so you have to be in the frame.
Oh, blast. Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So most sewing machines will have some types of dials in the front and a little bit of a lever. The lever is how you go backwards, but we'll get to that in a minute. One of the dials is, it's that direction. It's backwards in my screen. So one of the levers is most likely the type of stitch that you're going to want to use. So it'll go from a regular stitch to a zigzag stitch to maybe a couple more ornamental ones, or basically a catch stitch. Let's see. There are different lengths of stitches that you can choose on another, what's it called? Another little dial or lever depending on your machine. There is a little dial usually up here that gives you thread tension. If you go, all right, how am I going to do this? All right, if you go into the depths of the sewing machine, you get to the bobbin. So this, let's see, there we go. So this is the little bit where the bobbin goes. And this little screw, well, let's see if we can make it in focus. can you sort of see that there's this little indentation here? That's a screw. And that, here, maybe if I pull it back. No. Well, anyway, there's a little screw there. And that is your thread tension for your bobbin. So if you make that screw looser or tighter, then you will change the tension on your bobbin. And you want, let me see if I can do this one-handed. Nope. All right. Put it down. Here we go. There. So what you're going to want when your bobbin is in its little thing here is for it to be able to stay pretty well secured unless you jerk it down a little bit. And then if it comes down a little bit, that should be the right tension. So I will put that back in here. If it will let me. Come on. There we go. So now that I've taken the bobbin out, I'm going to show you. All right, let's see here. This is the place where you wind the bobbin. So let me pull the bobbin completely out so you can see where it goes. This one is already wound, but if you would like me to demonstrate winding a bobbin, I can do that. So you will put it, okay, I wasn't talking there because I knew you wouldn't be able to hear me, but you put it right there. You want, when you're winding from the thread to the bobbin, you're going to bring it around in what configuration, here we go, in whatever configuration your particular sewing machine needs. Usually there's a little bit up here above where the thread usually goes into the machine. There's a little catch that the thread can go around under and then to the bobbin itself. And then you put the bobbin over to the right so it's against this little plastic doohickey. And then you start running the machine and it should wind the bobbin. Now you want to make sure that the thread is going the right direction. And of course that can change from machine to machine as well. Many machines will not have a bobbin case that is easily removed. A case is typically for a vertical bobbin, yes, although horizontal ones are also quite common and often do not have a case. Yes, that is correct. Mine is an older machine and it has a vertical one, but horizontal ones usually sit right in the machine part itself rather than bringing anything out of the machine. So it would sit right here and you just drop the bobbin in and bring the thread up. So that would be another type of machine that's common. And again, YouTube tutorials are your friends with your particular machine. All right, so let me bring that off here. I'm going to show you a dial on the right, and then I'm going to have to be quiet because you won't be able to hear me anyway. Okay, so what I did right there was there is a lever, or a dial, I mean, that basically is where the machine goes forward and back, but then, so you can manually advance or recess the needle. So you can put it down and up just slightly. You can make it go for a while if you want to do it by hand like that, but then what's the point of having a machine? So I don't recommend doing that unless you're in the middle of a project and you're machine is just really not wanting to go through 50 layers of fabric, in which case, if you have to do it for a couple stitches until you get over the seam, that's something that can happen. But somewhere around there, or somewhere on the machine, there will also be a little button or lever or dial that will change it so that instead of advancing the needle when you push on the pedal, it will only do the thread winder for the bobbin. So that is really useful to know, is how to make that happen so that you're not completely running your machine when you're trying to thread your bobbin. Okay, so let me put you back on here and try to show you a little bit. So I'm going to put this back in the bobbin case. So for me, I'm going to put it in, and then I'm going to make sure that the thread goes in this little hole and out this little hole here. And then this little bit in the middle pops out, and that's what you hold on to, and it holds the bobbin in the case to put into the machine. And it goes into the machine a specific way when you've got a bobbin case. So that's something to know. I do have to turn this light on, but hopefully that doesn't wash out too much. Because that's how to turn on the machine. So what I'm going to do is hold on to the thread. Oh, let me show you how to thread a machine. I'm going to do this without words so that you can actually see. Okay, that's the only part I can do without two hands. The next part is putting it through the eye of the needle. And again, a needle threader is your friend if it's hard for you to see here. Oh, Esther, I'm sorry, but thank you. And I will definitely give you the handout and the recording ASAP. And machines are always threaded front to back. Yes, at least every machine that I have found has been threaded front to back. And then it goes under the foot, the presser foot. And the presser foot goes down onto the fabric. And usually there's a little lever either behind it or on the side. And that will help you keep the fabric in place when you are sewing. So now I can advance using this little lever on the side here, and advance the needle down into the machine, and it will start to pick up the thread from the bobbin, and then you pull it back out. And now both threads are out and you can put them behind, just make sure it's under the presser foot. And then you can close it up and your machine is threaded and ready to go. This little thing is useful to hold fabric onto, this part of the machine. However, if you're doing something small, like a sleeve or something, you can take it off and just use the thread here, or use the thread here. So without that part, let me turn it off. There you go. Now you can see it. So you can use it for smaller things this way, and then put it back on for larger. Technologies when you're talking about lighting. All right. So now I've got this piece of fabric. I need to sew on it. I have threaded the machine. Now I need to know what to do. This has a foot pedal, and depending on how fast or how much, it's like driving a car. However far you press, the faster you'll go, or slower you'll go, depending. So I put the presser foot down first. Always make sure your presser foot is down. I make sure that the needle is in the fabric where I want it. And if it's not in the fabric, what I can do is I can reverse that one little stitch. It's a pain, but it's only gone through once. So yeah, it makes a little bit of a hole, but you just, kind of smooth it out and keep going. So I noticed that this has come out from under the presser foot. So I put the thread back under it, and I make sure there are some lines that I want to show you. Not all sewing machines have these. Some of the older ones don't, but most modern sewing machines have these. Let me show you. I don't know, could you see those? Not really. Yeah, it's hard to tell with the contrast. There are little lines that are spaced out next to the presser foot here. And they are to the right. And so the seam that you are going to be sewing, or the side that you're going to be sewing, is always going to be on the right. You always want bulk of the material on the left. Otherwise, you have to feed it all through the body of the sewing machine. And oh my gosh, yeah, you never want to do that if you don't have to. But these little increments, these little lines here, are going to give you a visual for where you want your fabric to stay. So you can say, oh, I want 3 lines over, or I want 5 lines over. That would be a huge seam. I usually do 2 or 3 lines over because that's just what works with my machine. So once I put the presser foot down and I have put the needle into the fabric, then I can go forward and I can just make it very slow, or I can really put my foot down and it goes fast. Yes, if you don't have marks on the bed of the machine, you can try adding a bit of masking tape with or without marking it, and that will give you that visual that you need. That is really good. It's a great measurement tool, basically. So let me bring this out now that I've sewn a little bit. These are not my favorite sewing machine or sewing scissors, but because they're a little bit loose and they are not very sharp anymore because somebody used them for paper. So if anybody uses your fabric scissors for paper, it is permissible to murder them. No, I'm kidding. But it is definitely something that you want to keep your fabric scissors just for fabric. You never want to use them for anything else. All right, so there are 2 different ways to do the seams or finish the threads here. So you can tie a knot. So a square knot works. So basically what you do is pull the one thread that's behind out so they're on the same side, and then you make that knot. I like a square knot because it's very secure, but you can use whatever knot works for you. You can also do the same thing if it's on the very edge of the fabric. You can also do what's called a back stitch and forward stitch. Let me cut the threads off so I can show those to you. Okay. So here we go. I am going forward just for 2 or 3 stitches. And then this is not period at all, by the way, but it can be secure in for some fabrics. For other fabrics, it's not so good. For some fabrics, it's just very secure. So you hold down the lever that makes it go backwards, and then you again take 2 or 3 stitches, and then you let it go forwards again. And then when you are finished, you do the same thing, back and forward, and make sure that your stitch is at your needle's at the top, so that it makes it so it's not caught with the bobbin thread. So you can see here now, this creates this little extra bit. It's not at all period accurate. It's a lot faster than having to do knots every single time. And then you just cut the thread ends off. It's basically like going over 5 times for the hand sewing. But for some fabrics, it can cut through the threads of the fabrics, and that can create more problems. Let's see. Sewing machines need maintenance. Lint builds up in them. So if you have problems, if it starts to sound funny, or it starts to have like grinding noises, or it just seems like it's leaving oil spots, or something is off, try cleaning it first. You'll have to open things up a little bit, use an air canister. I have one right here. It's an air duster. You can also use, there's little cloths and brushes that are specifically for sewing machines. Some sewing machines are easier to open up than others. And there are also tutorials on sewing machine maintenance online. And it really depends on your machine. So does anybody have any questions about any of that? Not so far. Okay. I know I'm throwing a whole bunch of information at you, but I figured that because I'm recording, you can come back and watch any part of it that you want to watch again. So those are the basics of sewing machines. There's also sergers, and I can show you what one looks like. Right now mine's on the floor because I don't have space to put it on my table. I have to switch out which one I have on my table at one time, either the sewing machine or the serger.
So one thing I want to say, just because I've seen people make this mistake, if you're not familiar with sewing machines, don't get the very small or like the very cheap, it's only $10 or $15 sewing machines. They do not last. They're completely plastic and completely crud. Same with those like handheld, you can like hem curtains or like they don't work. You're better off either saving up to get a good one and search to see if you have like a sewing machine repair shop. They'll have used ones, or like I know locally we have a secondhand store that carries them.
Yes.
In PA, or just hand stitch it, because the frustration is not worth it.
Very, very true. Very true. Thank you for telling us that. Having a good quality sewing machine is really key if you're going to try any long projects or anything. I've had mine since I think it was a high school graduation present, actually. And I think it was refurbished when I was given it. That was terrible English, sorry, when it was given to me. And yeah, it's now starting to die, but it's been a long time since I got it. It's an old machine. So Yeah, and sometimes you can find things on the Facebook Marketplace, Melissa just said. I have found them in our local resource and restores, in Goodwill, in any thrift stores that sell such things. And sometimes you can find them for fairly cheap. They are not always cheap to fix, but sometimes it's cheaper than buying a new machine. And the older ones, I will say, have fewer plastic parts and fewer computerized parts. And I find that I like the old machines better. I find that they're sturdier, and I find that even though they don't have as many fancy stitches, they are more useful to me because of their sturdiness. They can go through more layers of fabric or whatever. So yeah, whatever you can find that'll do the job is, that's what's right for you. But making sure you get something of quality, it will last you longer and be more useful. Yeah. So this is a serger. And I'm trying to get in here so you can actually hear me. Oh, the mirror probably doesn't help. Let me move that. Probably easier to see now. Okay, so this serger has, it's also called an overlock machine. It has 4 different tones of thread. Let me show you that. Well, okay, right now it only has 3. This one can function with 3. It doesn't have to have 4. But this is really good for edging things. It's it's really useful for things like, hey, I need to wash my fabric before I can use it to get rid of any shrinkage. I need to just finish the ends really quickly and securely and then run it through the laundry. This is the easiest, fastest way to do that. This is on long-term loan from a friend. Sergers are kind of expensive, so yeah, I don't technically own this one, but they can be useful for certain things. Period. You're not going to want to use them for everything. Let me show you what type of stitch, what the stitch on the edge looks like. Here we go. So this, if you've ever seen something like this, this is serged. So that, yeah, it can give good napkin edges. It can be, it can be really good to finish seams if you're not going to flat fell them or do a rolled hem. And a rolled hem would be, you fold, let me see, you fold and then you fold again, or you just roll it if you want a really tiny hem. But that means that any raw edges of the fabric are tucked under. So that's a really good way to finish things, is to tuck everything under so it's not going to fray when you wash it, when you wear it, anything. Or if you're not going to tuck and tuck again, say you only have a certain amount of fabric and if you did a rolled hem, you wouldn't have enough fabric for the project. That has happened to me before. Serge it. Serge the edge, then you only have to fold it once, and you can just have the minimal seam possible, and it should be okay. But that's, yeah, that's a more advanced thing. Sergers have a bit of a learning curve. So yeah, it can be useful in certain circumstances, but it is not a necessary item. I'm trying to think, any other questions? Okay, benefits, I'm looking at my notes. Benefits of hand sewing versus machine sewing. Hand sewing, you can usually well, hand sewing is going to look better from a historical point of view. It's easy to tell if a garment has been hand finished or machine finished if you're up close enough. However, in the SCA, you know, there's the 10-foot rule, right? So if you want to machine finish something and then put some trim over the seam, people aren't going to be able to tell that you didn't hand finish the entire thing. Machine sewing is going to be faster and more ergonomic than hand sewing everything if you have tendonitis like I do, or arthritis like some folks here do. So one way that you can get away with more machine sewing if you still want to look as accurate as possible is you can sew all of the seams with machine, but then finish them by hand so that you can see the nice finished seam, but you don't really see the machine parts. That is one way to do it if you aren't too worried about accuracy. If you are worried about accuracy, hand sewing is the way to go, definitely. If you are worried about accuracy, but you've got the ergonomic issues, that's why I really like the combination. And if you just need to get new garb really quickly, like you've got an event tomorrow, which I know none of us do right now because COVID, but if you have an event and you're pulling an all-nighter sewing and you're really worried about this, just machine sew the thing and maybe get some sleep instead, says the person who hasn't always done that. I'm trying to think of what else could be advantages, disadvantages. Machine sewing, sometimes if your machine is good enough, sleep is overrated. Yeah, I know, but sometimes you really need it, or else the people around you can tell that you haven't slept. So, sorry, where was I going with that? Thinking of sleep. No, the advantages of machine versus hand sewing. Hand sewing, you can sometimes do more finicky work. So for instance, I was making a Middle Eastern dance outfit, an Egyptian dance outfit, and it had a lot of little finicky work on the top. And that's not something I could run through the machine. I had to do that by hand. And so hand sewing can be more versatile. But machine sewing, you can get faster seams. If you're doing like a skirt hem that's 1,000,000 yards long. And because it's near the floor, most people won't see it. Okay, so that's pros and cons. Let me look at my notes again. This is why I take notes beforehand. Did anybody bring any projects or questions? Oh, the top of gores. Oh, yes. The finish is much better by hand for the top of gores. Oh, mine are, well, you can kind of see here. These are not hand sewn, and it kind of bumps out a little bit. However, if it were hand sewn, it would be much flatter. So yes, thank you, Halima, for bringing that up. Definitely. Did anybody bring any projects that you want to ask questions about? Okay, I'm going to take that as no. Thank you all so much for coming. I am so glad that we could hold this class and that you all were here. And I hope that helped. And thank you all for staying late. I know that I should have scheduled it for a 2-hour class instead of a 1-hour class. That was my fault. I totally underestimated the time it would take for me to go through all of these things. basic machine sewing on joining seams and finishing by hand. Yeah, I really, that is the way that I normally do it, just for, you know, ease on my hands. Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thank you all so much. I would like to say thank you for, oh, the class on garb in the new year. I will be doing that probably in January. I have to put together a handout for that too, but that's, we've got a little more time to do that. Yeah, I will definitely plan on 2 hours for the future or more depending on the class subject. Okay, and I would like to really thank our EK MOAS team, Marietta helped me put this together, and Catalin, thank you so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the things you did to help as well.
No problem. Thank you for teaching. We're always looking for teachers.
Oh, of course. And if anybody else wants to teach any classes, I know we are always looking. All right, thank you all so much. I am going to end this. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.